Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
Introduce our next speaker. Next up, we have Brett Greene. Brett has been an advocate for psychedelic research and education for over 20 years. He is the research administrator for the Center for Drug Discovery at Northeastern University, a position he has held for more than 10 years. He has co-managed over 80 million in grant funding to support cannabinoid and serotonin research. He co-founded Psymposia in 2014, a prominent media and events company globally recognized for its social, political, and scientific coverage of the psychedelic movement, as well as having held numerous conferences and events around the globe. Brett, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psyched.
Such an excellent presentation from Nick. This is going to be a very different presentation. While I can talk science, this is actually really a talk on the intersection of culture, science, business, and ethics. Here, I'll pull up my screen. Hopefully this will go without a hitch, but we will see. This is my first attempt at giving one of these talks. Okay, here we go. Everybody is interested in conflicts. It's just kind of the nature of the beast, I think. And there's a lot of conflicts in the psychedelic movement and now the psychedelic industry. And for those of us who have been working in this space for many years, for in some cases decades, there is maybe some caution and in some cases some resentment about how we were doing it when it wasn't cool. We weren't doing it when there was no promise of money. And now that it is cool, now that there is a promise of money, I think there's a lot of lessons that the people that have been working in this space for a really long time have been working on, both the activism side and the science side, the indigenous side, etc., can teach about really the areas that we need to be aware of and areas that we can be hopeful about. Really this talk is about exploring the space from the perspective of both the activism side, as well as how the activism side and the new industry around psychedelics are somewhat colliding. So just to begin with, I'll make a brief disclaimer that these are my thoughts alone. However, I am involved in a new psychedelic venture called Adelia Therapeutics, which we're very proud of, which is a drug discovery pipeline for tryptamines. This talk isn't going to be about that, and my views just represent my own. So anyway, let's get started. So my background, I think, is interesting, and I really don't want to make this talk necessarily about me, but I think that my story is somewhat interesting from the perspective of how the science and the culture sort of existed in parallel. So I'll start back in 1997 when I had my first, what I thought was LSD experience. It was probably more likely 2CB. You see there the blotter that I took. It was flying condoms, and I had read a lot of books, especially Timothy Leary books, etc. And I decided one night, you know what, I'm gonna give this a shot. I was 14 at the time, and I stayed up all night, and I had a mystical experience, and that kind of started my psychedelic history. In 2007, I joined the Center for Drug Discovery, and I began working in under the director Alexandros Makrianis, who's one of the world's leading figures in cannabinoid science. We also have a serotonin lab that's very well known. A lot of our money comes from the government, but 99% of it. That experience was and continues to be really eye-opening from a scientific perspective, as well as learning how the sausages get made, so to speak, in terms of research. But it's also completely different than what my work in the psychedelic realm has been, which is more activism, education, and dealing with socio-cultural issues as they arise in the psychedelic movement. And I think that having the two pillars, let's say, of classical drug discovery, exposure, as well as my work with NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which I currently manage a NIDA-funded conference called the CPDA conference, mixed with my experience with psychedelics has been very interesting, but I'll get to that. So in 2011, I had an ayahuasca experience that was incredibly healing for me. In 2012, I attended the Psychedemia conference, which was a real landmark conference held at UPenn that Nijay Devineau and others put on. I went and founded Psymposia in 2014. Psymposia held our first conference at UMass Amherst. At this time, really psychedelic conferences were just kind of getting out there in sort of a bigger way. There had been many other conferences, from the 90s on. And in 2015, we held Envisioning a Post-Prohibition World at UMass Amherst. At the Symposium conference we held in 2014, we had Dennis McKenna and many others. Envisioning a Post-Prohibition World was really a diverse conference and kind of the first of its kind to get in front of a lot of the social justice issues, which Psymposia has become known for. In 2018, I founded a recreational cannabis company called EvoCon in Massachusetts. So again, I'm very interested in kind of the differences between cannabis and my experiences in that and psychedelics. And in 2020, I founded Adelia Therapeutics, and I resigned from Psymposia. And the reasons for my resignation we will talk about. For some people, when they hear psychedelic industry, it seems like it's a no-brainer. Like, of course, there's going to be a psychedelic industry. Of course, if these things can help people, then, why shouldn't there be an industry around it? But for other people that have been activists in this space, psychedelics have always kind of occurred to them as a unique phenomena that challenges the status quo. It challenges the system, it challenges capitalism. And so it's supposed to be disruptive. It's considered a disruptive technology. Besides that, it's considered by many to be a sacred technology. And of course, there's many tribes around the world that have practiced for thousands of years traditions with psychedelics. These are just some of them. The idea that psychedelics are both nature's way of connecting with God or a higher power or oneness and a rite of passage is in conflict somewhat with the capitalist system. I mean, these are coming from indigenous communities that are a lot closer to nature. And for many, the psychedelic experience suggests that this world that we're living in, this modern world, is fraught with all kinds of problems, and that it's not good the way that it is. Now, a lot of people would agree, both, I would say, the left-wing side of psychedelic activists as well as the right-wing side, that our world is imperfect. And I think many people who have had a psychedelic experience have had their eyes open to ways in which it's imperfect. Certainly I have. And the question is, well, what do we do with that? And how do we accept that incremental improvement as opposed to looking at psychedelics as something that's going to be inherently political in one way or inherently disruptive? I mean, we know that set and setting, i.e. your mindset and where you're taking a psychedelic, greatly affects the outcome of the psychedelic experience. So the notion that psychedelics are themselves, even in indigenous context, good or positive, is really one that I think contributes to a lot of the idealism that exists in terms of what psychedelics are or are not supposed to be. And I want to talk a little bit about the nuances to that. I would say, in the last 9 years or so, it's become clear from many that, sexual abuse is an issue in psychedelics. It's an issue in both the Western context as well as in indigenous contexts. I was really grateful and honored to have Lily Ross speak at our first conference and talk about her experience with sex abuse in the Amazon, but it's come out elsewhere. And one of the first conflicts in the psychedelic space that I was party to had to do with the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council, which no longer exists, which was a nonprofit organization that was started to deal with issues in the ayahuasca retreat centers, specifically around sex abuse, but not just sex abuse. The Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council was started in the West, and it proposed safety measures and a council that would basically deal with issues as they arose. There was a lot of controversy about that council, especially by indigenous people that saw it as a gesture of colonialism as opposed to being, an authentic gesture of concern over the safety of people who were going to the Amazon and experiencing some negative things. As a result, the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council faced a statement of an open statement signed by over 60 people that basically shut them down. And the issues continued, but this was kind of an interesting example of an early conflict in terms of the last 10 years, where the motivation of addressing some of these issues came head to head with some of the notions of, I would say, idealism of these indigenous contexts. Obviously, indigenous contexts are not where sex abuse is isolated. There's also been sexual abuse in psychedelic therapy in a Western context as well. And many feel that these issues have been kind of swept under the rug. I've been part of mediation to deal with sex abuse allegations as they pertain to psychedelic psychotherapists and others where there was professional people, psychiatrists, etc., that were involved in inappropriate interactions with patients. And I think that this also poured some cold water on the generally positive material that was coming out about psychedelics at the time, which has brought us to where we're at. There's always been conflict in the psychedelic movement. We had, of course, Timothy Leary, who was more conservative than Ken Kesey, but a lot less conservative than Dr. Gary Fisher, who was treating schizophrenic children who were nonverbal with LSD and had amazing success doing that, and who actually blamed Leary to some extent, as well as other proponents in Leary's circle, for popularizing the drug, because it meant that it ended up terminating his work, which, you know, is now being looked at again. And then to the right of him, we have people like Charles Manson, of course, and the Manson family, as well as Dr. Ewan Cameron, who was arguably one of the evil doctors in history who tested LSD on unwilling participants in the MK Ultra program for the CIA. The point that I'm trying to make with this slide is that psychedelics are not inherently positive or negative. They're not left-wing or right-wing. They are non-specific amplifiers, is commonly referred or famously referred. But the notion that they are inherently curative, or that they are panaceas, or that they push us towards a left-wing or a right-wing political stance is a notion that we should be dispelling, because frankly it's not true, and I think it's dangerous. And so I would caution that one of the issues that has arisen in terms of the conflict between, let's call it, left and right in the psychedelic space, really is about the marketing of psychedelics, how psychedelics have been marketed, and especially the very positive kind of rosy-eyed picture that we now see. So I think everybody in the psychedelic movement would agree that these are amazing tools with amazing potential, but we need to be really careful to make sure that we're not conveying this false notion that psychedelics are inherently good or inherently positive. This is one of the heroes of the psychedelic movement, Terence McKenna. If you don't at least occasionally contradict yourself, your position isn't nearly complex enough. I think that this is a good encapsulation of what maybe both sides of the psychedelic equation sometimes lose, which is to say that psychedelics are incredibly complex. They open up a doorway that is really endless, and the different modes of a psychedelic experience can really open up different doorways, and each of those modes, I feel, has something to offer. So that would be different contexts of taking psychedelics, etc. And I think one of the issues that has arisen on both the corporate-delic, as we call it, side of the new psychedelic industry, as well as the activist side, is the idea that there's a right or a true or a good context for taking a psychedelic. Whereas I think that really psychedelics are, the psychedelic experience is a function of the drug and the setting, and each of these functions can unlock potentially different experiences that are themselves interesting and worthy of our study and attention. You know, I'm a people pleaser, and that's a problem that I have. It's very hard for me to feel hated by anybody. But when I think about all of the different concerns in psychedelics, really, I think that this is the Venn diagram that I articulate. So on the one hand, we have a psychedelic culture that has developed over a long period of time, and that culture has different factions in it. Those factions can include really people that are, for example, you know, really into DMT, really into LSD, really into psilocybin. But the factions also include people that are on the left and the right spectrum, people that are conspiracy theory prone versus people that are, you know, very straight-laced as well now, as well as different business models. There are people that believe that only nonprofit business interests are going to be valid in psychedelics because they believe that psychedelics are exceptional for the reasons that we've mentioned. There's obviously a ton of ethical concerns with psychedelics, and I've referred to some of those concerns already, but there are other concerns about open science that we'll get to. Of course, there are legal concerns. There are still people in jail for possessing psychedelics. The legal structure in this country as it pertains to drugs, we know is disproportionately impacting people of color. Obviously, we see the news nowadays, and I think thankfully these issues are finally being addressed in a more consistent fashion. Unfortunately, it takes the police brutality and murder to make that happen, and of course the science, because it takes research, it takes studies, and of course it takes money to do all of those studies in order to get acceptance through the FDA. With respect to business models as well, you have business models pertaining to the pharmaceutical side of the industry. You have business models pertaining to a recreational, quote unquote, side, or a decriminalized side. I like to think that there's a middle ground for everybody where we can all, coexist, and where these different spheres are kind of given the attention that they deserve. I talked a bit about the open science side of things. In 2018, there was a statement put out on open science pushing for a open data a sharing community around data, and an agreement not to go after each other in vicious ways. The North Star Ethics Pledge just came out. I urge you guys to check this out, but I will say that I think that part of the issue with both the Open Statement of Science as well as the North Star Pledge is that sometimes when you have a statement that people sign, first of all, it's easy for people to just sign it and be given cover in terms of what the pledge is saying, but that's the kind of the end of it. It's sort of like the Ten Commandments, where you get a dogma, and it seems to end the conversation in some ways around ethics or around possibilities, when in actuality I think that it's a lot more complicated than that. We have USONA and MAPS. MAPS has been raising money via a nonprofit, via the psychedelic community for quite a while, and they're now getting into phase 3 with MDMA. They're very close. USONA is a nonprofit going after psilocybin. USONA represents, I think, the spirit of open science, but I want to kind of use this as an example to discuss how even with an open science charter, there can be controversy. MAPS, I think, in the spirit of open science, if you look at kind of the letter of the law, shared information with Compass Pathways, which created a big stir in the psychedelic community on the left side of things, and they were following, I would say, the open science statement which they had signed. And so I think it poses some interesting questions as to just because you sign open science, does that make it end controversy? I don't think so. I think it's a complicated thing. And personally, I don't believe that patents are evil. I don't think that psychedelics necessitate us changing everything about capitalism necessarily. I think that there can be good patents, there can be bad patents, there can be good practitioners, there can be bad practitioners, and we should be looking at things on a case-by-case basis. After looking at different ethical charters and considering ethics, and especially my role in some episodes that have come out in terms of being a mediator, I created a proposed ethical charter myself. And this charter, I don't need anybody to sign it, but these are some of the main issues that I think I've seen and I would consider us looking at. Some of this is obvious, but it keeps happening. It keeps repeating. So I think it's definitely worth us looking at. There's been a lot of issues, obviously, with sex abuse and therapists, which suggest to me that there really ought to be, a no tolerance policy with respect to that. If you're engaged in psychedelic psychotherapy, you have an obligation to rise above those instincts, especially in the context of that therapy. And that goes for therapists who are engaged with sexually with patients, as well as therapists that are taking or sharing drugs outside of a therapeutic context. I've seen both, and I've also seen the mix of sex and extracurricular drug use from professional therapists and psychiatrists. And I think that we really need to address that, and we really need to draw a sharp line. And many have pointed to the need for a professional board of ethics to handle that. I actually think that this is a job for ethicists, and ethicists should be getting involved in psychedelics because there's a lot of ethical questions, and ethics is a messy and complicated subject. I also feel that psychedelic drug companies should donate to nonprofits and foundations, especially those that are promoting diversity, ending mass incarceration, supporting decriminalization movements, indigenous rights of preservation of indigenous lands. The cannabis industry is interesting because in states like Massachusetts, my own state, cannabis companies have been compelled to have positive impact plans, and those positive impact plans involve the exchange of capital to promote a positive impact. I think that there should be something similar with psychedelics companies. A lot of psychedelic drug companies are not really going to be state sanctioned, however, because they'll be federally legal as pharmaceutical companies pursuing psychedelics as FDA approved drugs. So it might be hard to compel these companies to do that, but I really feel that if we should be signing anything collectively, we should be signing something that suggests that we will be supporting with material means nonprofits and foundations and others that improve the world. One of the issues that I've seen with the positive impact plans with cannabis is that the states that are compelling cannabis companies to have these positive impact plans really put a lot on those companies as opposed to having the companies be able to just donate or support other nonprofits. In my opinion, nonprofits are there to really do the good work, and there's already nonprofits there, and I believe we should be supporting those nonprofits as opposed to believing that companies that are trying to make money, trying to raise money, etc., have necessarily an obligation to divert their attention into nonprofits. In my opinion, a company should focus on what it's good at, and it should support others that focus on what they're good at. So we should be supporting as an industry nonprofits and foundations that are doing this good work already. And I believe that there should be some agreed upon mechanism for companies to do that. I feel like number 3 is really important, but it's also kind of a thin line. A lot of the pushback from the psychedelic community at the psychedelic industry has really been about both the spread of misinformation as well as kind of the idealization and glorification of psychedelics as panaceas. I think this is really important because, we should remember that, psychedelics were foretold by Aldous Huxley in Brave New World to be potentially tools of, an exploitative, autocratic government. And I do think that that's somewhat of a risk, and we should be remembering the lessons of Brave New World and really avoiding the spread of misinformation, the spread of pseudoscience, and the curtailing of a marketing strategy that is incredibly rosy or too simplifying. You know, we want to be treating people who are sick. At the same time, you know, these are incredibly complex issues, and the psychedelic experiences itself really infinite in terms of what it can bring up and what I think it's capable of doing for society, both good and bad. And then four, this is a big one for me. I believe that companies should never work towards criminalization, prohibition, or the jeopardizing of what we call cognitive liberty, which is my right to explore my consciousness as I see fit as a consenting adult. And, you know, I just want to say this as a message to companies out there. If you're not comfortable actively supporting the ending of prohibition and mass incarceration, that's okay. You don't have to be politically involved in that, but just don't contribute to making things worse. I think more important than using your data or your patents against people is using the state against people to support the bottom line, which is unfortunately what I think some companies are involved in currently, who are against decriminalization, maybe for all the wrong reasons. People shouldn't be going to jail for what indigenous societies have done for thousands of years, and which we really have them to thank for why we're here. And I really feel that if anything, this new psychedelics industry, as the cannabis industry is slowly doing, should really be a wake-up call to people that we should not be putting people in cages for this activity. Finally, I'll share this, which is a message that I got from San Pedro, in which my friend and colleague Didi memorialized in a painting, which is give love to people, give hell to ideas. One of the reasons that I stepped away from Psymposia is because I felt that the attack or deep criticism of individuals where people weren't dealt with on a human-to-human basis was a big problem. And I always believe that we should be trying to communicate our ideas as tough as they are before we vilify anybody or call anybody a bad actor. If psychedelics have taught me anything, it's that we are really capable of infinite things, both good and bad, and that we should look to each other to be the best versions of ourselves that we can. So, you know, I would just offer that as what I'd love to see in this industry, is both brutal honesty in terms of really going after bad ideas that could be dangerous, but also the love aspect that for me has been a real central lesson in the psychedelic experience. Not everybody will have that lesson, granted, but insofar as that lesson can get out there and psychedelic can be a vehicle for it, I'm really all for it. I will end by a shameless show of self-promotion here. This is Adelia Therapeutics. We are raising capital at the moment. Our first seed round. We have a novel proprietary tryptamine-based drug discovery platform for treating CNS disorders, especially treatment-resistant depression. You can feel free to get in touch with me, and we'll give you a very different slideshow with my team. I've got one of the only teams on earth that is really proven in bringing a psychedelic drug to market. That would be esketamine, deuterated form of esketamine. So I'm really happy to speak with anybody. You can contact me at brett@adeliatx.com, and I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Hey, Brett, thank you so much for the talk. Really appreciate it. So to our audience members, Irie Selkirk wasn't able to make it today, so we actually have some time right now. I'm going to ask some questions, and then after we're finished, then we're going to go into screening, continued screening of 13. Brett, really appreciated the talk. I think it's such an important topic, and this is something that I'm constantly in conversation with these types of questions with people today. I'd really love to start off by just asking, there's this constant vetting that I think is happening in the community right now of, who should be considered a community member, and what does it even mean to, what is the community in the first case, and then who is allowed to be considered part of that. There's folks who are coming in that are possibly younger, maybe they're graduating from college, maybe they're going into college. Their first experience with psychedelics might be through an internship with a company like Compass, or with another, kind of for-profit player in the space. So what are your, thoughts and ideas of, what are the minimum criteria to be considered a community member? And at the end of the day, what even is the community?
Yeah, great question, and one that we've been wrestling with for a long time, frankly. First of all, the community is really different factions of people that have had specific psychedelic experiences. Some people that have had the psychedelic experience that we're all one and everything's great, and and other people that are maybe more cynical, so I think it's different factions that are interested in different things. So first of all, the community is really anybody that calls himself a member of the community at this point. It's so diverse and divergent. There's a lot of different subgroups that I think constitute the community. Second is really the I think that the community is an idea that stems from the notion that people that have had a profound psychedelic experience share that as a commonality, and that universal experience is what draws people into the community. So if you've been really touched by a psychedelic experience, the first thing that you want to do is you want to go outside and you want to, shout it out on the mountaintops. We used to not be able to really do that. I mean, I was shouting out, on the mountaintops and telling my mother and everybody else when I was like, 15, hey, I had this amazing experience, and everybody thought I was crazy, right? Nobody thought that these illegal drugs were ever going to be anything but, shit that we shouldn't be doing, and that I was totally nuts for doing it. So I think that the community is really anybody that has had that profound notion that this is something wonderful, something great, that, but that's kind of the first thing that happens, right? You're the first time you have a profound experience, that's what you do. But then you start to meet other people in that community, and suddenly you realize, well, I thought it was nirvana, but actually it's not nirvana exactly. It's a glimpse. And sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And so the glimpse of that, but then the contrast of meeting other people that are having ongoing troubling experiences, that have had adverse effects, that have had adverse events that they haven't been able to integrate, as well as the people that have been really hurt and harmed by people that are proponents of this. That starts to make you think like, okay, this thing of the psychedelic community, it's more complicated than I suspected. And then from there, you go and you read about how the psychedelics were originally proliferated by nefarious people in the CIA, et cetera, that were up to no good. And the history of psychedelics is not rosy. So from there, the rabbit hole just is endless. So who's the psychedelic community? I mean, I guess Dr. Ewan Cameron could be considered a member of the psychedelic community. So at that point, where do we draw the line? I think the community, unfortunately, becomes somewhat meaningless. It's just like we have a global community. Well, we have a global community, but we still have, George Floyd being murdered in the street. I mean, that's unfortunately the way that I see it.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And, so in terms of that, then if it is kind of just this nebulous, terminology, how do we choose, who to engage with and, feel we need to engage with, and when do we choose to be able to kind of step away and distance ourselves from particular factions?
Well, it's like anybody, you know, you want to see what your heart tells you about them, and you know, move on from there. I think that my litmus test is if somebody's walking around saying that they're enlightened, I stay the hell away from them. You know, I've never met an enlightened person from psychedelics. I've met people that have become more aware. I've met people that uh, have been healed, but I haven't met somebody who has perfected the art of being alive through psychedelics or through yoga or meditation, to be honest. But that's my first litmus test is, okay, does this person think that they have room to grow? Or does this person think that they already kind of know? Because that's the difference between, I think, people that have had an adverse event from psychedelics where they saw the glimpse, but they sort of integrated that glimpse as instead of, hey, I've got so much more to know and I've got so much more to integrate, I've already achieved it. I'm enlightened. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people walking around like that. And I think that there's a lot of people in the industry, unfortunately, that are more or less preying on that for money. And we call that spiritually bypassing, right? Where there's people that cling on to a certain, let's call it sacred technology, and they use their familiarity with that sacred technology to make the implicit or explicit argument that they are better, you know, and so they virtue signal using that technology, while really I think that they are forgetting the core of the lessons of what they actually learned. So it's a problem. I like people that are self-deprecating in the scene, and that's who I gravitate to, because that's what I believe that the message of these plants and medicines are. It's you don't know that much. Don't take yourself that seriously. Keep learning, keep digging, and keep loving.
Definitely. Yeah, and to kind of you know, continue on with the message that you shared, you know, share or give love to people, give hell to ideas, or apologies if I phrased it wrong. Like my personal motto is very much you know, fuck the system, love the people, and kind of similar to that. I think, you know, one thing that I've also seen a lot of is aggression. Do you feel that, you know, aggression in this space is indicative of kind of those you know, enlightened you know, or individuals who claim enlightenment, or do you feel that aggression actually you know, does play a role and is important? Which camp does it fall in? Does it fall into the critique of the ideas, or does it fall into the lack of love for people, I guess?
Oh yeah, that's a wonderful question. It's such a thin line. I think that really it's about the spirit of the challenge. It's about the spirit of the critique. If your spirit is inclined to just rip somebody down, rip a person down, I think that we know where that falls. But if you're ripping down ideas, if you're ripping down if you're giving a systemic critique, that's a much different thing. And that's really a problem in discourse in general. It's like we've gotten way beyond the ability to separate the takedown of a person from the takedown of an ideal or an idea. And social media plays a role in that, I think. And you know, as does politics. Unfortunately, when you support some ideas, you hurt people, right? So when you support ideas of white supremacy, you hurt people. When you support ideas that you know, we shouldn't trust victims of sexual abuse because it inconveniences us, you hurt people. So there's obviously passion, and yes, it does express itself in aggression when the line between an idea and the harm it causes gets crossed. But I do think that there's a nuanced way to really try to separate them. You know, when I've had problems with people in the psychedelic community, I've gone and I've talked to them face to face, and I've said, you know, I feel like, you know, the way that you're trying to market this is problematic for me. This is why I feel like it is. I'm coming to you because I respect you as a human being, and you know, I'm not going to get you out of the scene. So I would rather, you know, you change ways that I think are harmful. But at the end of the day, you know, it's up to them.
Definitely. Yeah, kind of extending on that point as well, so we even just through the experience of this conference had asked several, several groups to speak, a practitioner group, one that was delivering, psychedelic experiences, and then an individual practitioner as well. And we got faced with a lot of criticism asking us to take these two groups down, because of some things that might have happened several years ago with either malpractice or some sort of irresponsible delivery. For us, when we were diligencing these individuals, we had looked at the last 6 months and talked to individuals who had partaken and had participated in their experiences over the last 6 months. And I think that there was this really complex conversation that came out where this group that was asking us to take these speakers down was not open to dialogue with these different individuals, and they preferred to kind of spread more of a message kind of underground to their individuals, that these were individuals that were not to be trusted, instead of having public discourse with these groups, because they felt that giving platform to these individuals would provide harm. From our perspective, not being able to have public discourse with individuals that already have, thousands of individuals who are coming through their retreat centers, coming to them as practitioners, actually opens the door for more harm, because the, gossip that can permeate doesn't actually allow for the public discourse to bubble up and allow for individuals to stay informed about what those practitioners are doing. So I think it's, sometimes there's a, keep people silent with your platform, or put people up on the platform to be able to have public discourse about the issues that they may have faced. Do you feel like that there's any approach that's better, and is it also very much context dependent?
Well, yeah, it's completely context dependent. I mean, there are practitioners that have been party to negligent deaths. I mean, not just one, but multiple deaths that have attacked people while they're in their psychedelic experience. And no, I don't think those people deserve a platform. I mean, I don't think that we should be putting neo-Nazis on television either, but so unfortunately, there's a lot of harm that does happen in this culture, and I don't think everyone deserves a platform, no. But at the same time, like, I think that there's a difference between going after somebody like for the ideas or the actions that they do, versus going after them because you have declared them like an enemy or a bad person or a villain. That's what I think really is a conflict for me. My message when I take psychedelics is that there are no villains. And maybe that's a naive message, but I think that really fundamentally, when we have a black and white view of who people are, it hurts us. It hurts us as individuals, and it hurts us as a society. That doesn't mean that I believe that everybody should get a platform. I think that some people have abused their power, and they shouldn't get a platform. When there's a school shooter that writes a manifesto, I mean, do I think that they deserve to have their manifesto everywhere? No. I mean, if people want to read the manifesto, okay, they can find it, they can read it. But part of one issue that I see in society is that we give people that do wrong too much of a platform. We have too much of a love affair with anti-heroes, and so it's a very complicated question, and it's a great question that you're asking. I think that what my litmus test is I won't go after somebody personally, but I won't support somebody who has abused their power repeatedly to have a platform. That's their business, and you have the power to put somebody on a pedestal or put somebody on a platform or not. And so you have a responsibility for how you use that platform. And it sounds like you might have made the right decision here.
Mm-hmm. What does it look like? There are definitely clear-cut cases of individuals who have consistently abused their power, or have, even if it hasn't been multiple times, have abused their power in a way that seems unforgivable. What are the, do you have any ideas for processes of, I guess, reintegration into the community, into, allowing for individuals to have platforms when, they might have been experimenting with, a modality and maybe weren't as prepared as they thought they were, but are, consistently improving for years of time. What does that process look like of, allowing for an individual to make mistakes, to be open to criticism, and then work their way back into actually becoming a practitioner who's actually learned from the things that they've done wrong and has become significantly better? Does that involve the person who's been hurt coming in and participating in that type of process and helping that happen? But yeah, just would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Well, I've been part of a mediation process for that exact thing, and I've been party to the numerous issues that have arisen from that. And I think that really the problem is that them being reintegrated shouldn't necessarily constitute them being replatformed. Like there's a difference between, okay, you're not a monster, you're somebody that's had problems, like we get it, okay, but then there's like, okay, now we get to replatform you and give you your Louis C.K. comeback tour. There's a big difference between those two things, and unfortunately, I think that some people that have been deplatformed or canceled believe that they have some kind of inalienable right to a platform. Well, there are a lot of people that want a platform, right? Like, that's the one thing that nobody's really entitled to. And so I think that unfortunately, once you reach a certain level, and then you do harm, you sort of blow the platform. It's like if you're running for public office and you do the wrong thing, that could cost you your campaign. I mean, it's sorry, but you can be a lawyer, you can be a janitor, but you're not going to be mayor. It's just the way that it is, and we're not weeping for politicians that lose their platform, right? So I think it's complicated. It's sad. It's really not nice when this stuff happens, but when you abuse your power and when you harm people, that's just what happens. And not everybody harms people to that extent where they can't come back, but some people do, and we'll see in the fruit who gets to come back and who doesn't. Like it's not like I don't think there should be a committee to decide like, okay, you get to have a podcast and you don't. It's not about that. But there are instances where somebody who has harmed women in the community was deplatformed, and people protested his appearance at other conferences. And really, it's the conference's responsibility to decide that they don't want to, and it's the people who are protesting to decide that they're going to protest. We're all capable of our own actions. I'm not saying that there should be some kind of grand committee that decides these things. People decide them, and the chips fall where they may. So I can tell you this, that as somebody that has access to platforms, I take that responsibility seriously, and I know that by putting somebody who has caused harm to my friends and my colleagues or people in the community onto a platform, it's sending them a message, and it's valuing the feelings of the perpetrator over the feeling of the victim, and that's something that I just won't do, and I won't support.
Definitely, yeah. Well, thank you for all of that, Brett. There's a couple questions from the audience as well. I'd love to have the chance for you to answer.
Yeah.
One person asks, I see psychedelics as a unifying tool, finally put down the dichotomy of nature versus humans. I used to have issues about capitalism and psychedelics, but it is starting to fade. Do you think psychedelics used as self-improving tools will make more people think there's nothing inherently wrong with capitalism?
That's a good question. So I think it's a non-specific amplifier. So it depends on you. It depends on how you take it. It depends on the context. It just depends. It's not inherently unifying or not unifying.
Let's see. What are some nonprofits that you would suggest looking into who are doing specifically decriminalization work?
There is a, well, I think there's groups like Drug Policy Alliance, which has done a lot of good. There are groups like Psymposia, which, you know, I resigned from, but which I still will support. Trip Report described them as like, you know, the friend that wears the Che Guevara shirt to Thanksgiving. And, you know, I think they can be pains in the ass, and I don't always agree with them, but I love them. There's a people of color psychedelics group that just emerged that I'm very interested in, and I'm very happy to see. There's a number of groups that frankly, I don't know if they're nonprofit or not, but I mean, I think that there's, you know, seek them out and judge for yourself what you think.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. Brett, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the time.
It was an awesome conversation. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Talk soon, man. Bye-bye.